in open. The first item on the agenda is the year-to-date financial status for 2022 to 2023. I'll hand it over to Tammy.
Okay, so I've just got a little bit of slide show just to kind of walk us through it to make it a little bit easier for you to follow along. So this is a report I bring to committees or board every year this time of year. We've just finished our revised estimates at the end of December. They were submitted to the ministry, so this is based on more actuals. So when I do budget, we're projecting what we think the students will be. And at this point in time, we have a better feeling of where we're at based on the students in the system. So the budget has been updated to reflect that. So at this point in the year, the expenditures have been recorded up to the end of December, which is about 40% of the school year and 33% of the fiscal year, depending on the type of expenditure. And at this point in time, we're showing 34.73% spent of the forecast, which is up 0.9 compared to December 31st of last year. So showing that we're on forecast. Everything's looking good to the revised budget, to the forecasted budget. So some of the changes that happened when we did revise budget is we had an increase in enrollment, and we'll go through that enrollment page. So it increased our GSNs by 1,856,000. But when we looked at the actual teachers and ECEs, there's a grant that does their qualifications and experience. The average experience was down from what we projected. So some of that's retirement, some of that's because we have more teachers and just changes the average, right? So that grant went down by $1.3 million, those two grants for those two groups. And then we had an increase in the grants for transportation of 2%. So if you remember at budget, they told us we were all the boards were gonna get 2%, but they hadn't allocated it yet. So at the end of August, we got our 2% announcement. And so it's added into the grants. And then our other increase in other grants for other reasons. The biggest one of that was our SIP grant, which is our special education, special incident apportion amount that we have to apply for. So the estimate we used at budget, we revised it by about 114,000 to kind of hopefully be more accurate. And then we had increase in transfer from deferred revenues GSN. So we had GSNs that weren't spent last year and when we did our year end. So we're assuming they will be spent this year. So that revenue and expense have been added. And same with miscellaneous grants. We have an increase in their PPFs, some of which were carried forward from last year that weren't spent, and some were ones that we weren't sure we were getting until the fall when they released the TPAs. And then an increase in other revenues, so tuition, rent, and interest would be in there as well. So the biggest portion of that would be tuition, and that would be that we got more international students. In the spring, we didn't know how many we were going to get. And that would be through our Yes Canada agreement and MLI agreement that we have. So that would be the biggest part of the increase in there. On the expense side, we'll walk through the salaries and the changes in staff in the coming slides. But our salary and benefits went up 779,000. So that's net of the decrease in the average salary. And it also doesn't include some of the positions that we'll see on the staff side that are funded from miscellaneous grants or PPFs or funded from some of these deferred revenues, so specific grants. So you'll see them there. We've increased the sick leave by 225,000. That's an estimate because we are showing an increase in sick leave in the fall compared to the fall before. So the fall before we were still wearing masks. This fall we weren't. And as you've heard, everybody's getting a regular flu this year on top of COVID. So we're seeing an increased cost, so we'll have to monitor that through the year. An increase in expenditures equal to deferred revenues GSNs, and then the next line, the miscellaneous grants. So those two are matching the revenue that we've added in. So those are just the matching expenses, some of which are salaries and benefits. We've increased our transportation costs by 309,000. So part of that, 159,000 of that is the 2% that has been moved to the operator, or transferred to the like increased in the operator costs. And then an extra amount for increased costs related to mostly spec ed, special education routes. And then there's an increase in some department budgets and utility budgets. So 88,000, and it's all gas. The natural gas rates are up from what we projected. Whereas electricity was very close to the same. So that's 3.2 million matching to our increased in revenues. So this page is a little bit smaller to see, but it's the summary page of what I just talked about, kind of line by line, showing that we're still showing a balanced budget. So we show in the middle column forecast that we have a surplus, a deficit of 981,000, but we're transferring 981,000 out of reserves to cover that off. So that's the 940,000 one-time ICT purchases to get us to the 1-to-1 from 7 to 12. So our operating surplus is still showing 0 at revised budget. And at the bottom, we show our accumulated surplus at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year are the same, both at almost 4.8 million. And that would match to the financial statements that were presented in November. So then we get into the fun stuff, enrollment. So our enrollment has gone up, as I mentioned, basically in elementary. So at budget, we estimated the enrollment to be 6,075, sorry. Yeah. When we do the budget, we use the numbers that are used at staffing, but then we also project, because staffing, when we do staffing, we go by registration. So only the JKs that have registered, we staff on. But when I do budget, I know we're going to get more. So I budget more FTE, and I budget more salaries, more staff for those JKs. So on top of the 150 that I added, we're up another 52 in JK alone. So, but we were up across the board, as you can see, in all grades, in a total of 212. Secondary, we're down slightly, and that's mostly to do with the adult high school just having less under 21 than what was projected, because we've seen a drop there in the last couple of years, but it's still hard to predict. So overall, we're seeing an increase of 192 based on an estimate of what we believe March will be. March is usually very similar for elementary, but secondary, depending on grade 12s that don't come back for the second semester, that number could change. So hopefully that's a good estimate. Here is the summary by family. So I know that's always interesting to see. So you can see Arnprior gained 72 students at their elementary schools. And it was actually a split between Walterzado and AJ you saw the increases, not just one school. The green is the secondary schools and the blue being the elementary. So you can see most of our families went up except for the Renfrew family. So then we move on to staffing. So because enrollment drives staffing, our teachers went up by, classroom teachers went up by 15.1, which was made up of mostly elementary teachers for the increased enrollment. So 9.9 on top of what I had budgeted. And then we had 3.2 CERT teachers that were funded from the COVID Learning Recovery Grant that we got, which when we did budget, we weren't exactly sure how we were going to use that grant. It was kind of decided over the summer and then implemented in the fall. So it's kind of just a movement of some of where we had budgeted before. And then in secondary, we're up 2 teachers that was funded from the PPF grants. So then on the non-classroom side, or the other classroom staff, sorry, we're up 10.5 4 is ECE, 2 of which is for increased enrollment, as you can imagine, and 2 is ECE that are funded by PPF grants. So they're ECE coaches, I believe, that we've added. We're up 9.5 educational assistants, and they would be funded from that increase from SIP and the increase in enrollment. So we have an increase in those special education grants. So they're funded there. And then I say less a 3.0 placeholder for the CERT that was used above. So from that funding, like I said. The non-classroom staff is up 1.3, which is for a vice principal and a system vice principal for Indigenous, which that one is funded completely from the Indigenous grants that we get that are completely enveloped. We had an amount as a placeholder in the budget that hasn't been specifically allocated, so some of it was allocated and used for that position. So, this slide is shows the change in the revenues from what we originally budgeted to the forecast and shows the increase on a line by line basis. So all the A's mean that the grant was increased because of enrollment. So that's the majority of them. The special education grant was up because of enrollment as well as for that SIP amount that I talked about. So that was line 3. Then lines 11 and 12, which are the qualification and experience grants that I talked about. So that's where we see the decrease in there. It doesn't match the number in my report because we also gained there because of enrollment. So there's an increase and a decrease in those grants. So in transportation would be increase of enrollment plus that 2%, which I forgot to mark that down. School operations grant is due to enrollment only, and then the tuition fees, just the increase in numbers. And then the other, we talked about the increase in the grants, the miscellaneous grants, as well as a little bit of interest. So that shows the total increase in the revenues and revenue, sorry. So then on the expense side, there's two parts to that change. So I've kind of broken out the one pager that you have into 2 different sections. So the first part is the change in the expenses. So we see the change column, the third column in, from the original budget to the forecast. So a lot of them are A's, which are due to the staffing changes. Either the change in the average salary or the increase in staff. You can see the change in the sick leave at line 2. That's 2 C's, so that's in textbooks and staff development. Those would be where most of the changes go for the increased PPFs or the deferred revenues. Usually hit staff development or classroom supplies if they're not in a staff line. That's the majority of those. And then transportation, again, change in the grants, or the 2% and the change there, we'll see that. And school operations was a combination of change in staff and average salaries, as well as the increase in the natural gas rate. So the other part is that the report is to kind of make sure we're on forecast. So it compares what we spent to the end of December compared to the new forecasted budget, compared to last year at this point in time, compared to the final at the end of the year. So as you can see, most of them are really on par. Sick leave, that's where it's showing that we're up higher from last fall. So we could see that we're lower later in the year than last year. So that one's a hard one to predict. Most of the other changes are just due to timing. So it depends on when we have workshops and when we get these grants that have been announced, when we start spending them. Same with continuing ed. It's not that we're that much higher. It's just last year we had more costs in the summer that weren't reflected here in the current part. So it's just timing. When we look at the other expenses, the only one that's looking up is board admin, and I believe it's just some timing issues. As well as maybe some increased costs for negotiations that might be in there, so I'll be drilling down and watching that. But overall, we're showing that we're on forecast. And then the risks are the enrollments are not final until till we get the March count date. We're still in the middle of the heating and snow season and the sick leave piece. Our biggest risk right now. Is there any questions?
Any questions? Yes, Mike.
Just regarding transportation, the 2%, is that across the board for the province in transportation?
I'm not sure. I know both the boards here got the 2%, but I don't know.
Asking is, we all live far apart in the valley and fuel is fuel.
Mhm.
And I mean, I've gotten to know Bob White a little bit and, they're doing a great job, but they're on a very, very tight budget.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to find out if the urban areas got the 2% or less or more, and with their population density, they're on average, I'm sure their students are traveling a lot less on a bus.
Yeah.
So it'd just be nice for whomever to drill down to figure, are we in rural boards in the province getting our fair share? Because, Bob in a roundabout way sort of said to me that the province being in debt as it is, could be looking at even stricter rules for students having to walk further and fewer bus stops, et cetera, because we've had pretty lengthy conversations, Bob and I.
Yep.
It just concerns me as a trustee in a rural area that, I don't know who brings something like that to the table to the province, but I don't see things getting any better when it comes to fuel, et cetera. I mean, just like we're having to deal with natural gas prices, our gas prices for our buses have dramatically gone up. So is 2% a fair number for us small rural areas is my question. I don't expect an answer, but I do think that it's something that should be on the rural board's radar, district's radar.
So I can kind of answer it because the 2% isn't just really for fuel because there is the fuel adjustment. So the fuel adjustment, they get twice a year, the operators. We actually just processed one because we do some of the help with some of the bookkeeping. So they get it at a pegged rate that is much lower. So they get the increase in the fuel adjustment. So at the end of the year, when I presented the change in the grant, you saw that it was quite a bit higher. And that was why, because they funded us for the fuel adjustment and then we give that to the operators. So they do get adjusted for the higher fuel rates when we're in years like this where the fuel rates are quite high. They also lose when the fuel rates go below that pegged rate, which they did during the pandemic when the rates dropped. So we do get that. And then the other part is they are reviewing still the transportation grant and they may be looking at rural versus that a little differently. So
Yeah, because I just want some of the rationale of fairness, because our constituents, if in fact our young, particularly elementary students need to walk further, go to fewer bus stops, and if that is coming down the pipes, and I think Bob's a pretty knowledgeable guy, he senses that might be happening. Maybe now's the time somebody in the province for rural boards needs to take up that torch or that argument.
Yep.
Anyway, and my second comment is not towards you so much, Tammy, just to throw it out there. Continuing education down 39%.
Yep.
Okay, and I put down COVID question mark. And then my next line is, do you see the previous number of enrollment returning to pre-pandemic numbers? Like I don't have a sort of a cold rationale as to why, other than something to do with COVID, but that's a healthy drop, extremely healthy. So I don't know if there's a clear.
That pause.
I don't know if there's a clear answer or anyway, just my comments.
Yeah.
First,
Just back to the transportation thing. The 2 years prior, we got the 2% in August or whatever, but the 2 years prior, we didn't receive anything, right?
Correct.
Which is part of the problem I know with the bus companies is that they're really struggling now to sort of make up that. And it is a real crisis, I think, for the future unless there's something done.
Yeah, just two things and partly in response to Mike's questions. Certainly the Ontario Public School Board Association is really advocating strongly for student transportation funding being appropriate to boards and where they live. So that's an ongoing conversation with the minister on, and I'm sure you'll be at PES later in the week. I'm sure you'll hear more about it, but that has been a struggle for quite some time and it's not going away anytime soon. So there is, I think we can look to them as certainly advocating on behalf of the entire boards. The other comment I just make around the Con Ed piece, and I had an interesting conversation earlier this week, actually. And the comment was made is that continuing education numbers usually drop when the labor market is strong. So when the labor market is strong, they're not looking, they are not needing to upgrade or change or retool their skills. So there is that I hadn't thought about before, but it makes good sense, right? And right now the labor market is strong, so our Con Ed numbers are down a bit. I think that would do some of it. I'm sure COVID had partly to do with it as well, but I thought that was an interesting comment that made sense to me anyway.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
Anything else? Oh, I heard it beep.
Yeah.
David Kaiser?
Just a general, I think, general interest question. What do we do with the interest that we earn as a board off of our reserves? Where does that interest go?
We don't earn much interest off of our reserve because if you remember from the financial statement presentations, the ministry claws back that cash so that we don't earn interest, they earn it. So most of the interest we earn is the interest on our operating side of things. So it goes into our revenue and helps offset.
Okay, anything else? No. Thank you, Tammy. Appreciate the report. Welcome to Kim. Nice to have you on board. And the next item has 3 parts to it, but all of them would fall under Pino for the international excursion. So Pino, I'll let you go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Really appreciate being here virtually. I know I'm normally in person, but here for our Council of Ontario Directors of Education conference before PES. Just wanted to bring 3 items to the attention of the Board of Trustees through you, Mr. Chair. The first one is around a follow-up to a discussion that we had back before the end of the calendar year around the nature of international excursions. The second one, I'll turn back over to Superintendent Smith to follow up on with respect to Fellows High School and the excursion that they're requesting. And the third will be over to Superintendent Riddell around the reestablishment of the partnership with l'Académie Clermont-Ferrand in South Central France, which we're very excited about. The first part I'll take, and that is to share with the Board of Trustees that senior staff has had a number of discussions at Executive Council, and we're taking this particular item to CAS, the Council of Administrators at the secondary school level, on a number of fronts. We'd like to prepare a report for the Board of Trustees because equity-related issues as they pertain to international excursions is a complex endeavor. In fact, we're realizing it's more and more complex as we look into it. There are 3 key areas that I'd just like to highlight. And then again, looking for a bit of patience from the Board of Trustees for us to bring this report this spring sometime. We're not prepared right now for a report. I'll explain why. And then hopefully still permit the Trippett Fellows to proceed, knowing that senior staff is going to look at a number of these items. They focus on three key areas. The first one is that we've engaged our corporate partners, excuse me, for example, EF Tours, for instance, but not only EF Tours, but EF Tours is an example in a bit of a collaboration around this very matter. They are looking at an organization at scholarships for students who would be underserviced and or underprivileged. They're looking at cost cutting or cost adjustment measures as an organization to reduce the amount per student. They're also looking at spreading payment plans to not only raising funds before an excursion, but allowing an extension of payment of that experience after the trip itself has happened to try and offset some of the challenges that our students face, those who may be facing barriers of various sorts, including socioeconomically. One of the key elements that they mentioned that they are working on is the notion of scholarships and bursaries for students selected at the system level. So what they're saying here is working with school boards to have oversight to really seek out some students that may not come forward themselves, to try and engage them in what often is a once in a lifetime opportunity for them at a relatively reasonable cost, all facets considered. The other is early approval of trips so that schools can get a front end start earlier on some of the fundraising measures, all of which are very valid. The other example of a partnership, corporate partnership that we're continuing to explore is Experience Canada, which is the also known previously as CIVEC exchanges. And those are exchange programs provided for opportunities, youth aged 12 to 17 to learn a second language cross country. So that's more of a national partner, but it's still in the context of our very fluid, dynamic, bilingual environment, would allow some of our students to have an exchange within the country, but to focus it in perhaps on their continuation of being immersed in the French language, just as an example. So that first part is all about the work we have with our corporate partners, and we're in the midst of that. We've got a meeting set up with EF Tours to continue this dialogue. Their equity liaison, Chelsea Smith, is connecting with Superintendent Riddell, myself, and the Vice President, George Levesque, on this very conversation, wanting to hear very much our thoughts and also the expression that they are working on this very item with a number of districts. The second one is at the school level for us, and that is a follow-up conversation, as mentioned, with CAS, supporting schools' fundraising plans and expanding the nature of those to be as sensitive to equity-related matters as we possibly can be. And that's something that Superintendent Smith will get into in terms of the Fellows High School excursion that we're bringing back before the Board of Trustees. The third area is with respect to the creation or utilization of various fundraising mechanisms at the system level that we might tap into that provide some funds to, again, help offset some trips for students who may not be as advantaged in their circumstances as we would all like. So it's somewhat of a three-prong approach. Our corporate partners, school level endeavors, and system level endeavors to come up with a plan that continues the good work that we know our schools and our staff in particular have tried to do on this front in the past, but that we need to continue to grow it. So that's really the update orally for the Board of Trustees, with a commitment on the part of staff to bring back a report before the end of the current school year that situates how we'd like to handle this for all the other requests that come forward beyond the Fellows one that we return to the board table today. So that's our plan of action through you, Mr. Chair, and happy to take any questions from the Board of Trustees. And then I will turn it over to Jenny and to Kristen.
Thank you, Pino. Any questions? Yes, Mike.
Yeah, Pino, maybe it's just more of my philosophy than there's no real right or wrong answer. But number three, the creation of a system level, creating some sort of dollars, a bank of dollars that would be directly going to, a student or students to have the opportunity to take this trip. I mean, I can only speak from my own personal experience coming from a family of 6 kids. To put it frankly, I really never traveled much till I was in my 40s. And, you know, I think that there's probably a very vast majority of the people in this valley that, you know, probably just traveling in Ontario, Quebec's a big deal. It's more my philosophy than anything else. I mean, we have so much pulling at us financially in all different directions. I do question number 3 a bit. I mean, it's great to have the idea, but is the idea really realistic to have another siphon of funds going that way rather than, let's say, the student fund? I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not talking on behalf of the rest of my trustees. I'm talking on behalf of myself. So it's more of a personal thing for me. I don't think I was any worse for the wear not being able to travel. I always looked at travel as a luxury. I'm at the point now in my life where, you know, barring ill health, I'm going to continue to travel probably more and more. However, I question number 3, not question that it coming up and be tossed around. I'm just questioning for the future of that being sustained if it does come to fruition. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, if it's okay to respond.
Yes.
Great, thank you. I think Trustee Gannett, really, really valuable points. I mean, this is part of why we weren't able in a 4 to 6 week period to bring a report before you today. It's complicated. I think you raised some very valid points. There's some realities. We will not, as an organization, be able to pay for every trip for every student who ever wanted to go somewhere, despite our best intentions and despite a notion of equity that would be really ideal. I think there's some validity to what you're saying. There are some things we'll explore at the system level. Another point, we can't be utilizing ministry monies that are sweatered for other, you know, areas for this kind of thing either. It could be some kind of an expansion of some of the fundraising measures that we put into place, but it's something that I'll sit down with Meredith about in her new role to map out. You raise a valid point around the student support fund. One trip at $3,000 or $4,000 for a student could be 1,000 knapsacks worth of materials for students needed in the classroom each and every day. So we've got to be careful not to, skew the use of the student support fund. So it is exactly the key points you've raised that we're going to be exploring and coming up with a report to share with the board in earnest, the best that we can possibly do. But we thought we would put all ideas on the table. We ended up with these 3 prongs that we thought, okay, how can we situate this? Corporate partners, school level initiatives, system level initiatives, and we'll work with that, but all very valid points. And my final comment around your point, for a trip, say to Quebec, those within country trips, those national ones are often at a fraction of the cost of some of the international ones for obvious reasons, travel alone. And so that might be another opportunity. And that's why we entered that into the mix of this to say, well, maybe it's not a trip to, Belgium for a student, but it might be a trip to Nova Scotia or New Brunswick or British Columbia, whatever it might be. So great points, and points we'll take to heart as we prepare this report.
And just one last rebuttal. I do know that there are other agencies out there, and I think of one of the more common ones is Tim Hortons. I do know of several students in this community and elsewhere who've been supported at different various ages to go on sort of a lifelong trip that might be their only opportunity. So there are other agencies out there. I know the one common is Tim Hortons, but I do know of one young man who had that opportunity, and it was a real shining light in his life. I knew him personally, and there are probably several others that besides Tim Hortons that do such a thing. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? David? Go ahead, David.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think it's important that, these types of trips be accessible to every student who could potentially want to go. I would certainly not be supporting canceling these types of trips if we can't come up with the perfect system. Otherwise, I'll be very honest with you, we need to cancel every activity in every high school and elementary school in the county, because there's no such thing as 100% equitable equity in those situations. But I mean, we do have our student support fund. Part of that fund is to help with these situations. We do have a discretionary fund with the director that could possibly be used. And there's probably other avenues that you're going to come up with on your reporting to help us. So, I was talking to Susan about this morning, actually. And I mean, one of the things that came to my mind and would be a question and could be part of this report, perhaps, is, how do you identify students who would like to go to Europe, but don't have $4,000 to spend on the trip? How do we identify them? I mean, we can't go looking for them because we're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to single out people, but I think we need to come up with something in terms of that process. So, this trip is open to every student. I don't know how we market it, but there's lots of means we have to be able to support students. And as well, if they want to go and their family can't afford it, there are other avenues, as Trustee Gannett just mentioned, that they can look at. And maybe that's something we can also support, is finding some of these groups that would help and support student, like the Kiwanis group, the Rotary group, those kinds of people, because these trips are really important. And like was mentioned, I think, by the director earlier, they're once in a lifetime for many of these students. I'm certainly not going to support taking that away from them, but at the same time, we need to identify which students have an interest in going, which may not have access, and how do we get them to be able to, how do we get the funds for them to be able to join the rest of their classmates on these trips?
Again, through you, Mr. Chair, if it's okay to respond, I think Trustee Kaiser's points are also very valid. And it's interesting, Trustee Kaiser, your perspective on who would you pick? Because there's so many students who merit it and could go. One of the things that EF Tours, for instance, and Superintendent Riddell will bring a steady hand to this and seeing this through in this report and how we situate this, but that's where they're recommending some school boards have a system approach to that, where, for instance, and this may not be a perfect example, but it'll give the spirit of what we're talking about. If there's a student who's known to have some socioeconomic challenges, for instance, just making this up, but is very, very interested in architecture and really is expressing an interest and looks like that's going to be a potential passion to a pathway, that student might be approached at a system level or a school level to say, hey, would you consider going on the trip to Sweden to study the architecture that we're looking at on that trip? Maybe a poor example, but I want to just pick a different context. It's reaching out to some students that where it may be known, and the schools know their students best, that student might not ever come forward. So you're quite right. And one of the things, as you've said in the report, is we'll look to say, well, maybe we try to do that for 1 or 2 or 3 students a year across our schools to give that opportunity to someone who might not ever come forward. Because if it's just left to students coming forward and their families, again, there's a group that will be underrepresented and underserved. And that's where they're saying, no, actually, it's the other way around. It's the school thinking carefully, or the system thinking carefully about who could really benefit from that trip, about whales or whatever it might be, to the ocean, that kind of thing. So a really interesting dynamic. We're going to look into that further as part of this report because of its complexity. So really appreciate those valid points as well.
Thank you. Anything else? I just have a couple of.
David raised.
All right, David.
I just wonder, Mr. Chair, if I could quickly follow up, because the comments from the director were excellent.
Yes.
I quickly follow up. So I think, and I'll say that maybe my experience on Student Senate, I think you'd find somewhere in the process, Pino, that students themselves would be identifying fellow students who might have an interest in going, but maybe not the means. I'm not sure you'd have the parents coming forward, but I bet bottom dollar that their fellow students would be the first ones to go and say, this person has a great interest in this, but they're not going to be able to afford it. So I don't know how we work this process, but I think we can come up with something that works for everybody. And that's just a suggestion. Thanks.
Thank you. My only 2 things would be, I know we have one request here and it says it's a cost of $4,000, but that's just the basic getting you over there. You're also going to need some spending money. It's not fair to have somebody go over and have no extra money just because you'll need to buy some lunches, you know, souvenirs, just, you'll need spending money. And also, I'm not sure if the excursion, if it also covers like medical expenses, medical insurance, for like trips overseas. So there's still lots to think about when we have, a student go.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. Most of those trips, and I mean, Superintendent Smith can speak to the fellows one. Most of those trips have that wraparound approach where they're covering the insurance pieces. EF Tours does the notion of spending money while they're there for, to make it an enjoyable experience by all means. Yeah, I think valid points and definitely part of what we're thinking, because it wouldn't be a fruitful experience to go there only having paid the flight and nothing else, no ability to do anything else. So yeah, very much a wraparound approach there.
Great. Kim?
Yeah, I just wondered what percent, I guess, how big of a role fundraising plays in these trips. I know I did quite a few trips with scouting, and many of the kids, various backgrounds, couldn't afford a lot of the trips without the fundraising. Fundraising paid for probably 80% of their trips. And I'm not sure how much the school, like if there's an idea of how much it's limited or that kind of thing, because that would be a great way to make it more equitable for everybody that wants to go.
Yeah, another great point. I'm going to turn this one over, if it's okay, to Superintendent Riddell to give a little bit of detail on that one.
Hi, so that's a great and important question, Trustee Doherty. So fundraising, it depends on when the fundraising starts. So part of the trips, so the application for fellows, I have one for one of my schools. They do so, at least a year or a year and a half in advance for a number of reasons. Honestly, in my experience, and I've probably gone on 8 of the trips, most of the students would have part-time jobs because they also want, they want to go on the trip and realize that they need to pay. But for fundraising, my experience with when I've done it, certainly there can be stuff facilitated at the school, but even things like bake sales and the like, it has to be in coordination with the cafeterias and such, because there's only a certain amount of things that a school can promote outside of kind of the cafeteria each year. But they can, sell things like holiday treats, wreaths, different things for different religious events during the year, just to name a few. It can make a difference. It just depends on the number of kids who are going. If it's a smaller group, it's better. I know I've done a couple trips where it's been 40 plus students. We did do fundraising, but it really only made a difference. It was about $60 per child when it was a bigger group. So it depends on the number, but certainly fundraising is viable. But part of the approval for the trips happening at least a year and a half in advance is a lot of the students do, and the parents will say, depending on the household and needs of the household, well, you can get a part-time job and help to contribute to this as well. So that is a part of it. One thing on, say, for an EF trip, though, in advance, certainly the lead teacher who's in charge would coordinate quite often back and forth with their tour guide for EF. And I know I certainly would advocate the types of breakfasts that we felt was necessary. And that was from my first experience taking a trip where the breakfast wasn't that plentiful. So just having those conversations ahead of time. Usually the dinners, they're quite substantial. The students do pay for lunch. And certainly, if they want a gelato here or there, or to buy some souvenirs, but EF is pretty good in terms of itemizing the needs for the cost ahead of time. So fundraising could probably help with the spending money for lunches and a few small things.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, so we're on to the next, so excursion request. Janie?
Sure. So just bringing back to you the request from Fellows High School. They are looking for approval in principle to travel to Berlin, Prague, Dresden, Krakow, and Budapest in March of 2024. So not this March, but the next school year. As you can see in the package, the trip would be, they're looking at a 9-day trip probably, including 3 school days, just depending on flights and timing and all of those sorts of pieces, but that's the approximate time right now. They are hoping for at least 30 students to be able to take this excursion, but they can run it with a minimum of 12. The cost per student, as was said, is $4,083. And one of the things to note is that the company EF Tours that is either the most economical or one of the most economical trips that they do offer. So that was one of the reasons why Fellows chose it, as well as the importance of, you know, some of the places that they were going to and the experience that they would have in connection to the curriculum. So they do have a plan for fundraising that they're going to work through. Part of the process is that a school has to submit their fundraising plan before the beginning of the school year for anything that will be fundraised during that year. And so they will have a plan in place ready to go for when their fundraising plan is due to finance in September. So they most likely won't be able to start that fundraising until that time, but that gives them time to make some plans. EF Tours has, you know, they also, as part of their working with schools, helps them think that through. They have a package, you know, that they provide to schools to give them fundraising ideas and help them set goals and that sort of thing. So their minimum that they had said that they would hope for is to raise 200 per student, but they're hoping that that can be more. So the details of the trip are in the package. We have gone through the activities to make sure, you know, safe in terms of our regulations for sporting and water activities and all those sorts of things. There are great curriculum connections to history and geography and the social sciences. And the ministry has really has put something out recently just talking about changes to the curriculum for an increased focus on learning about the Holocaust in our classroom. So that is a nice tie too. There were some really great questions asked the last time that we had this conversation. So it was really good and good learning for me too, to be able to go back and ask some of those questions to the school staff, just to ensure that we've thought about all important aspects. So, you know, we've talked a lot about the financial piece, which is great. And I know that they are looking at giving that option of, they call it the uplift, where we can pay it for up to 2 years afterwards, as well as looking at EF Tours can support families should they choose to put up a donation page where similar to if someone were raising money for, you know, a different sort of organization, that would be up to the family's choice though, if they wanted to do that, to ask family members to contribute to the excursion. There were some really great questions asked about, you know, how are we ensuring that students will be emotionally prepared for the experience, which could be traumatic, could be triggering due to the, you know, to where they're visiting and the content. So that was really great to be able to think through. They did reach out to the company and ask them questions around that. And, you know, they reassured that, you know, we do these tours every day. We're very experienced in being able to handle, you know, when things, if a student has a response, we're able to support them in that. The school also has planned to, you know, it's really making sure parents and students understand exactly what the experience will be like. You know, so they are fully aware and fully expect, and, you know, giving them the chance to ask questions and really think about what that will be like for them before they commit. As well, the school is planning to do some work with students and families. They have some ideas to run some voluntary sort of book clubs and things at lunch and invite parents to some sessions just to, you know, learn a little bit more and make sure that they are prepared. The other question was whether or not there were alternate activities should the students decide that this part's too much for me. And so the company did come back and say, yes, they always make sure that they are providing for, so they have an option, but they have the option to abstain from a part of the trip, and that there's, you know, there's a spot for them to wait, and they can figure that part out if the students just decide that little piece is too much for them. And I believe those were, you know, most of the things that were asked and questions that people had raised the last time we talked. If there's anything else, happy to try to answer.
Any other questions for Jenny? No? There is a recommendation with this excursion, so I'll just read it off. School excursion request for Fellows High School. that the Renfrew County District School Board approves the excursion request from Fellows High School to travel to Berlin, Prague, Krakow, and Budapest from March 7th to 16th, 2024. So I just need a seconder for that. Thank you, David Dalton. All in favor? Thank you, and that's passed. The last item is L'Académie Clermont-Ferrand. I don't say it as well as Pino, but and our partnership. I'll hand it over to you, Pino.
Sure, I'll just pass it right along to Superintendent Riddell. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Chair Rowland, or Vice Chair Rowland, sorry. I just wanted to add a couple things just about international experience and learning, and certainly learning about other cultures and meeting other people. With our international students who come to Renfrew County. So first semester, we had 31 students, most of whom are coming from the program, Yes, Canada. So their exchange time varies just depending on when they're coming and where they're coming from. And I'll just read the list because it was pretty significant, all the countries from which the kids were coming: Spain, France, Australia, Fiji, Japan, Sweden, Italy, Thailand, Australia, Germany, Switzerland, and the Philippines. So that was semester one, and kids attended all of, kids were placed at all of the schools. So that was a really enriching experience for the students who were coming, and certainly for our students in Renfrew. Second semester, I don't know why there's a drop, but 11 have come. And again, from many of the places I said, but also from Hong Kong and Paraguay as well. So we just received 4 additional applications from Yes Canada. So we just got those this week, but we will look at how we can place those students. So they may stay with a student from our county, or they might stay with another host family, and the host situation is arranged by Yes Canada in that regard. But that's a great experience. And then in terms of the exchange, so this is the lovely poster, which I can pass around. And there are a couple of additional copies, and you can keep those. But we have 11 students who are coming from France, and they're coming April 17th now. So they are hosted with students in Renfrew County. What we are working on right now, though, is still we're matching the students, and we've had to kind of match and rematch a number of times just due to really some medical needs. So a couple of students who have severe allergies. We only have 5 students in Renfrew County, but hoping in the future that grows. Part of that, to be honest, is it was a pretty quick turnaround, and when we provided the information to the schools, a number of kids were interested, but it is, it's an experience, but it's somewhat onerous for the families to host a student for 6 weeks, and then 5 felt that they could commit, but a number of students who were in grade 9 said, had it been in grade 9 or in the future, I would like to partake, and it's for grade 10 students. So right now, we're just matching, and that should be finished by tomorrow, because it's a lot of back and forth trying to match. Part of it as well is we were able to match the students, but the students from Renfrew really want to be partnered as well at a school with another student from Renfrew. So there are 4 high schools in the region in France that we were looking at, but we're trying to keep, at least have 1 fellow Renfrew student there for the 6 weeks, because the students are only 16. So it is a big step. But lots planned for when the students from France come. I'll have more information on that in weeks to come. And then certainly when our students go to France in the fall, they'll be going in October. They'll have a very enriching 6-week period there. So not a huge update, but just that it is happening. That's an update. So it's happening. We're booking stuff and getting it going, but there's just been a lot of back and forth just to get things finalized.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
More comment?
Okay,
Yes, Kristen, I've had the pleasure of meeting a couple of the international students, the fellows over the.
Nice.
weekend. And it's not just them having the experience, but it's also interesting to see how the students respond in the school.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. So that being noted, I see a lot of potential in this growing, although it's a lot of work. I think that it's just win-win-win all the way around.
Mhm.
Anyway, thank you for the presentation.
It's great. In hindsight, I wish my kids didn't play hockey because I'd like for them to have this experience, and I feel like we're just at the rink all the time. So,
On a personal, my son had the pleasure of going to Croatia.
oh, nice.
Actually,
Yeah.
in post-secondary, and he went with a professor, and he actually part of had to do a presentation overseas. And
Excellent.
it really seriously impacted, it really grew him as a young adult.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Probably about 2021 at the time.
Excellent.
And,
yeah.
I could even see it happening even more in high school. Like you'd be really, wide-eyed coming to Canada and participating in a whole new culture.
It's wonderful.
Again, thank you.
yes.
Just a quick question. I'm sure I probably know the answer to. It's nice to see this getting back on kind of on track, because we were kind of heading down that track nicely before COVID hit. So I suspect that COVID just kind of really stopped everything, right? And it slowed everything down. And has it just taken a bit longer to kind of get going again now that, things have opened up? And what's your sense on that? And I guess willingness of students to travel as well.
It's a great question. I know, I think some boards are just entertaining getting started again next year. So in that regard, there's a commitment of this board and certainly families for their children to partake. So I think that's good, because I know some boards, there's still a bit of, just to kind of see how this year goes. I think, to be honest, part of it was the quick turnaround of, okay, we are going to do it. Let's meet, let's set a date, and just that quick turnaround. I don't think there was the window really for, in fairness to schools, for them, it was a lot on them and just to get that number. So we'll look at better strategies to start early next year. Yeah, because it wasn't really until November, and probably had I started a bit sooner, we would have had more students.
It's great to get it underway again, that's for sure. It's opportunity not to be missed.
That's in a really nice area in France.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? I just have one comment. Do you have like anything in place for more or less like an exit interview? To ask the students what they like, what they didn't like, what we could improve on? Like-
Yes, yeah. So I don't know. I'd have to look. The person who had this portfolio before left me some material, but certainly will consult with our partner in France and look at those exit interviews and the experience and such. So a lot of the responsibility for this type of exchange is on the host family, but there will be things that we do collectively for the experience as a board as well. And my colleague Sharon is really great at organizing that and making that happen. So.
Good, because you said if the big onus is on the host family, then we can put out a better interview.
Yeah.
For host families to say, this is what's expected of you. They're coming to our county, they want to see what's here, but also because they're so close to Ottawa, that most of the students are expected to go to Ottawa. So we expect you to, lack of a better, word to say, bring them to Ottawa, to Parliament, to Byron Market, as an example kind of thing. Right. All right, thank you.
And to Bonashare Caves.
And
We can walk it.
or even like ice fishing if they come in the winter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whitewater rafting.
Yeah,
Right, so all of those excursions.
Yeah.
So much for the canal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, not this year.
may not happen.
Okay, anything else? Anything else for the committee of the whole? This is my second one, and look, I'm gonna be off on time or half hour. So if nothing else, I need a mover and a seconder to, thank you, Brian, and a seconder to adjourn the meeting. Kim, thank you. All in favor? Adjourn.
Okay, and we'll be back at 4 o'clock for the board meeting. Perfect. Thank you. I think we'll call this meeting to order. I believe it is Tuesday, January the 24th, 2023, hard to imagine. And I would like to start our meeting with the territorial acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land on which our school and district buildings are situated is in the traditional, unceded, and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples on the land on which we gather today. And I will ask Trustee Gannett if he would please do the invocation, and we'll remain seated for this, please.
Thank you. May we who are assembled here have a true understanding of the duties that are placed in our hands. We seek to have the wisdom to honor our obligations to the good of the residents of Renfrew County. To the parents, teachers, electeds, and especially the students, may those who teach be ever inspired by goodness, and may the wisdom and the knowledge which they impart to our students ever serve as a beacon to lighten their way. As trustees, administrators, we will work together with integrity, perseverance, and respect to the fulfillment of the trust bestowed upon us.
Thank you, Trustee Gannett. I do have regrets from Trustee Kaiser and Trustee Primo. And I just want to acknowledge that we have Trustee Doherty and Director Buffoni on screen with us, joining us virtually. And a special welcome to our team, who we're going to hear from shortly. So hope you can bear with us for a few minutes while we get through the rest of the first part of our agenda. We look forward to hearing from you. I do need a motion to approve the agenda as it is written. Trustee Morris, a seconder. Trustee Doherty. And any questions or comments on the agenda? All those in favor of approval of this agenda? Thank you very much. And quick question on declarations of conflict of interest on this agenda. And seeing none, we'll move forward. I'd like to have a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting of January the 13th. I believe these were distributed earlier for you. It was a pretty short meeting, so I'm looking for a motion to accept. Thank you, Trustee Dobson, and a seconder, Trustee Doherty. All those in favor of accepting those minutes, and that is approved. Thank you very much. Excellent. Okay, so we're right into our presentation. Very excited about hearing this. I know this has been kind of postponed a couple of times, so thank you for your patience and return. And I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Smith to do the introductions.
You finally made it. So today we have with us our literacy intervention support teacher team and Shelley Gagne, of course. This team was led along with Lisa Murphy during the time that she was here with us this fall. So this team we've come to call the LIST because it's the literacy intervention support teacher. We needed a short form because we abbreviate most things. So the LIST team. They're going to share with you today some of the work that they've been engaged in over the course of the fall. When we did our last presentation around the annual action plan with a focus on elementary, we talked about the early reading work and the early literacy work that we're involved in. So today is a chance to give you a little bit more of an idea of what that looks like, at least what a piece of that work looks like. So we're really excited about that. They'll share with you, where some of their work is coming from, but really just to give a brief introduction, this whole area around the science of reading really has becoming more and more popular, and lots of evidence-based research going into looking at how we look at teaching reading to our young students. And with the release of the Human Rights Right to Read report last year, which I see you'll touch on too, so I won't say any more than that. It also is drawing more attention to the urgency of some of that work. And so just for your awareness of where this lovely team came to be, last year when we became aware that we were getting some funding to really support tutoring work, funding to support reading interventions and reading assessment work, it was the team got together and said, what do we do? You know, how can we best utilize this funding so that we can put the best support in for our students and also build capacity with our staff? So there came the list team that you have in front of you today to share with you the great work that they have been engaging in our schools. Okay, so I'll turn that over to Shelley to introduce the whole. Sure.
And maybe we can spread out a little bit. That would be great. I can stand in front of the TV. I'm sure I won't block anybody's view. So we have a really dynamic group of educators, and I'll start, this will be my test of naming them all. So Lori McDonald, Crystal Leteau, Tanya Campbell, Natasha O'Brien, Jen Francis, and Courtney McCullum. And they are based in our schools across the district. So they've come together, some of them as strangers, and have had to partner and collaborate and get to know each other very quickly. But the big thing that they had in common was their knowledge of literacy, their passion for supporting students, and their enthusiasm to take the recommendations from the Right to Read and apply it into our daily practice. So I'll turn it over to them because they've got a lot of information to share, and then hopefully we'll have a few questions afterwards that we can answer for you.
Thank you, Shelley. I'm going to begin today by talking a little bit about the Right to Read report, which I know some people are more familiar with than others. The report was released early 2022 last year, and it was in response to a human rights inquiry into learning more about how students learn to read and students' right to read. The Right to Read report highlighted how learning to read is not a privilege, but it's an essential human right. The Human Rights Report includes 157 recommendations to the Ministry of Education, as well as to school boards and faculties of education on addressing systemic issues that affect the right to learn to read. But don't worry, we don't have time for all 157. It is a very lengthy document. If you look at the long one, it's about 500 pages online. There is an abbreviated 57-page one that you can look at, but it is online if it interests you. The Right to Read report stated that Ontario is not fulfilling its obligation to teach students to read and to meet their right to read. It stated that many students' reading difficulties are not being taught early enough, and this has significant consequences. As we know, reading is important. It's integral for many aspects of our learning, early in school and all the way throughout your years. Initial difficulties can increase over time, and it can impede access to the curriculum. The report also talked about health concerns, mental health concerns in particular, and less employment opportunities for students that are not successful with learning how to read. The report also made specific recommendations to First Nation, Métis, and Inuit learners as well as to multilingual learners. My favorite quote, and I have to share it, the inquiry is not just about an equal right to read, it's about an equal right to a future. A few other really important findings that I'll just touch base on. The report that found that Ontario students are not being taught foundational word reading skills at the phonemic awareness level. The report acknowledges that we're not using the term dyslexia in great deal in our education settings today. However, a disability in reading is the most prevalent learning disability that we are seeing. The report called for a review of our curriculum at the elementary school level, as well as educational programs and additional qualification programs for teachers who are already in classrooms. Currently, we don't have a new curriculum. We've been listening, trying to figure out when it might be coming. But in the meantime, the Ministry of Education, did release this effective early reading instruction manual. And it gives teachers a little bit of a starting base. So 74 pages in length, and some really good examples in there. Lastly, the report recommended that all students in kindergarten to grade 2 be tested twice a year. And that is where our role comes in.
Okay, so on to phase 1, which we call getting started as a list team. So now there are 6 of us here. What are we going to do? What's our plan? So under the expert leadership of our principals, Lisa Murphy, who recently retired, and Sally Gagne, our first month together consisted of connecting as a team, collaborating with others, decision-making, planning, and lots of new learning.
Initially, we got to know each other and we quickly learned of our collective passion for teaching literacy using evidence-based practices. With the list position being driven by the Right to Read report, we dug into the report as a team to better understand how our role responds to these recommendations while aligning with current practices and supports in our board. Since our role complements other system positions, it was also critical to work closely with them. So in September, we invited the instructional coaches to our initial meetings to grow our understanding of structured literacy and to gain their expertise around science-based strategies through slideshows and digital resources that they had already created, along with finding out more about their recent work in schools. We also collaborated with the coaches along with the Spec Ed Central team to set a direction, to select assessment tools, and to create a plan using a team approach. We felt it was necessary to minimize the duplication of service while ensuring equity and access for all students. Together, we researched various science-based universal screeners that were noted in the Right to Read report in order to select the tool that was best for our board. So as a team, we chose the Acadians screening tool as the best fit. Why? Well, it was feasible. That's important. Courtney, one of our techie list members, was also able to create a template for us so that once we gathered the screener data, we would be able to input it and analyze it and help us figure out where we were going. Acadians is also backed by research. It is standardized. It assesses core literacy skills. It supports the RTI tiered model. It is quick to administer, and it identifies students who are at risk, which is just what we needed since we were heading into interventions after that. But in order for us to use Acadians, we needed to complete a 12-hour training with a final assessment, which we did also in the month of September. Looking beyond the screener to our work in the schools with students for the remainder of the year until we redid the until we redo the screener at the end of the year, we also developed an intervention plan and a toolkit based on the work of Kim Lockhart to ensure that the interventions that we were all going to be doing with students in schools would be consistent across the sites. And then finally, we practiced our intervention by going into schools and pulling students and tweaking our intervention so that we knew that once the screener data was collected and we knew where our schools of focus would be and what students we needed to support, when we went into school, we would all be doing the same thing. And now I'm going to pass it over to Jen, who's going to talk more about what we did later in the fall.
So that was the first month of September. So at the end of the September, our team screened all the SK and grade 2 students in the board. This large endeavor took about over a month. We collected the data for each school and compiled it into a document to share with educators and administrators. Our team analyzed the data to identify the schools and students that would receive intervention. We collaborated with the special education central team and instructional coaches to ensure a tiered approach for support without duplicating services. It was determined that all schools would receive at least one round of intervention, and some schools had more needs, so they will be receiving 2 rounds of intervention. Prior to starting our first round of intervention, we met with the school cert teacher and classroom team to help inform our grouping since they know the students best. This was definitely a team effort. Once our student list was determined, we gathered diagnostic assessments on our students to identify what skills need to be targeted. In order to build capacity and establish relationships with educators, we decided to create a slideshow to share with schools. It incorporated a definition of the literacy intervention support teacher role, information about the shift from balanced literacy to a more structured literacy approach, as well as some examples and practices, resources to support teachers on how to get started in the classroom. Our work
from November to May has been and will continue to be focused on working directly with groups of students to develop their literacy skills. By the end of the school year, the plan is to complete 4 rounds of 6 weeks intervention, supporting approximately 180 students during each round.
So the education system is constantly evolving and changing, and our communities need to respond. In terms of the right to read document, it's apparent that capacity building is critical to system-wide student growth and achievement. Early this school year, we were fortunate to participate at professional learning workshops at system meetings. Our roles were further defined to include insight of our learning about anti-oppression, equity, and diversity. As a team, we embarked on this new journey. After some comparative research, we decided to pivot from our team-developed intervention that Tanya was speaking about to the structured literacy program from the University of Florida, UFLY. This change was made to maintain the validity of the intervention and also to allow for capacity building, as classroom teachers would be able to imitate the interventions, as UFLY was originally developed to be used as a whole class resource. The literacy intervention support teachers have also extended an open invitation for classroom teachers to come and observe the interventions using UFLY. In general, teachers are very excited about this systematic approach. The board has purchased over 100 manuals, UFLY manuals, to share with classroom teachers, along with professional development on how to use the resource. As word got around about our role and our interventions, the invitations to present started to roll in. We were honored to present at ACES, SEAC, the Parent Involvement Committee, and this meeting, of course, while constantly updating and tweaking each presentation with our new learning and according to the audience. Some of us have been invited to staff meetings to present information about our role and how teachers can shift some practices from balanced literacy to structured literacy. Recommendation number 76 of the Right to Read document states, school boards should provide small group early and later interventions for students when evidence-based classroom instruction is not adequate for them to develop average level foundational word reading skills. This team's primary commitment was to provide interventions to selected students in each school across the board, a huge task due to its geographical vastness. As well, the instructional coaches are mirroring this work by continuing to work in schools with classroom teachers and supporting PLCs. Some examples, for example, at the Madawaska family of schools, the coaches are supporting PLCs on embarking through the road to structured literacy. At Herman Street, most of the primary staff are already immersed in UFLY. The grade 1 and 2 teachers have divided their cohorts into 4 groups, and each group goes into a different classroom to receive targeted instruction at their level each day. As educators learn about the right to read and the shift to structured literacy, many are already seeking out the resource on their own and forming their own professional learning communities within their schools. In closing, I'd like to share the important message on the last page of the Right to Read Executive Summary, which states, "It is time for change. Change will require a sustained commitment to build capacity and to address the inequalities that Ontario students currently face."
Moving forward, now we will share with you the results of the data that we collected from our Acadian screener back in the fall. So this is all of our schools collectively. So a total of 1,887 students were screened over a course of a 5-week period using our Acadian screener. 663 of those students from SK to grade 2 met the benchmark, as you can see here in the green. 223 scored just below, and 1,001 students scored well below the benchmark. We'll now dive into each of those specific grades that we screened. This is our SK data. 621 students were screened altogether. The SK screener focused on 2 benchmarks, including letter naming fluency and first sound fluency. Next is our grade 1 data. 618 students were screened, and the grade 1 screener focused on 3 benchmarks, including letter naming, phoneme segmentation, and nonsense word fluency. And into our grade 2 data, 648 students were screened. The grade 2 screener focused on 2 benchmarks, including nonsense word fluency and oral reading fluency. Now, although this data may seem surprising, the past few years have contributed to the widening of the gaps that educators were seeing prior to the pandemic. Turn it over to Natasha.
So when we met as a team, we knew it was important that we consider what was the most effective way to help students become successful readers. And to do that, we turn to the science of reading and what it tells us about how students best learn to read. So the science of reading is scientifically based research that has been conducted all around the world over the past 50 years. And we've learned a lot from that research. So for example, we've learned that our brains are not naturally programmed to read. So we actually have to rewire them in order to do this. We also know through research that it's essential that we teach children foundational skills in order for them to become successful readers. They need to be able to bind the sounds of oral language to the letters and letter combinations that represent those sounds. So that's why the phonics-based activities are so important, and the phonemic awareness activities that are an important part of the structured literacy. We have also learned that we can actually determine at an early age what students will be at risk for possibly having reading difficulties. And so if we are able to intervene and provide the appropriate intervention, we can actually minimize and at times completely reduce those risks, especially if we start at an early age. So those are really important things that we know through this research on the science of reading. Something else that I found extremely interesting was that we know that approximately 5 to 10% of students will enter classrooms and those students will learn how to read effortlessly. Then we have approximately another 35% of students who will learn to read relatively easily just using broad-based literacy programs such as balanced literacy, which is what is being used for instruction, and I would say many classrooms across Ontario at the moment. And then we have upwards of 60% of students who we know are not learning through that type of instruction, and that they will require a more phonics-based, explicit, sequential type of instruction, which is what we are referring to when we say structured literacy. Now, if we refer back to our data, so we can see here out of the students, so these students in the red, those would be the students that were well below benchmark, and those would be the students that we are talking about who will require, that's approximately, I think that's 53% when I figured it out, 53% of students in the board that actually will require a more explicit phonics-based program, such as the one we're talking about. So we know that we have many, many students that we need to try to reach within our board, and it's really up to us to determine. We know what we can be doing to make that happen. And so that's why the training is taking place, why the interventions are happening, why the capacity building, all those things, because it's really important that we be reaching everyone, not just a smaller percentage of our students. So ultimately, over time, our goal is that we will be, I'll go over this way, that educators will be making that shift from the balanced literacy to the structured literacy. The problem with the balanced literacy is that it uses what we call a 3 cueing systems approach to teaching reading. And so through that approach, students are taught how to use strategies to predict words. And so there's a lot of guessing. It's ineffective, and it's not science-based at all either. So we know that we can use some different types of instruction that are structured literacy based that will have greater outcomes for students' reading success. And that would be implementing that explicit systematic phonics-based approach that I was talking to, using the scope and sequence so that there's actually a guide for teachers that they know at what, we start with this letter and then the next one and the next one and the next one. So it's very systematic. It's actually great, I would say, for schools, because if a student were to move to a different school, then you know that there's going to be within a range that they will be within that area that they should be, because a teacher at another school should technically be teaching the same thing, that same order, that same type of instruction. And the other thing, high frequency words, they're often known as sight words. If you had children in the system, it would mean like you might have seen words that were coming home, they were being flashed. But as a structured literacy approach, I just brought in a quick example. So you're still teaching children irregular words that cannot be sounded out. It's just done a little differently. So they would have the words, for example, but we would focus on the parts that can actually be sounded out. And then the parts that are irregular, so they don't fit the letter patterns that we're teaching children, those are the parts that we tell them they have to memorize by heart. So it's just more actual direct instruction to students about the patterns in the language and what is regular or irregular. It just draws their attention to things. The other thing would be decodable text. So when they talk about that, a lot of people usually think of leveled readers as what is being used in the classrooms right now. And those leveled readers are actually based on the 3 cueing system that I was talking about earlier. It requires children to memorize a lot of words, and it doesn't have necessarily the letters and sounds that they would know. So when we are using decodable text, the material that the children are being introduced to, it means that they know those letters and sounds, so they can actually sound out the words. So that's a huge difference for children. And it actually, they can be very successful with that. And then I guess my last point to say is that, there's this expression within the structured literacy community that says, when you know better, you do better. Because as educators, we were taught at Teachers College to use balanced literacy approaches. It's still probably widely used. I know that certain universities are starting to shift how they're moving forward, but educators really are just teaching what they've been taught to teach. And so it's really important that we're making these efforts within the board to be building the capacity, to be teaching people, to be training and informing people, because once we know better, we can do better. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, so that is it. Does anybody have any questions?
I'm sure we do.
Okay. We've got a very knowledgeable team, as you can see.
No kidding.
With a passion, I'm sure they'll continue to be able to support and answer any questions you may
Okay,
have.
anybody have any questions, comments? Trustee Dobson?
You have many people, like older people coming from the community. I'll be honest with you, I'm a reading tutor with the grade ones at St. Mike's in Douglas. I have 5 little guys I see every Wednesday morning for an hour. And they're at different levels. One little guy's at level 3 right now, but I have a little girls up to level 14. But that's the highlight of my day. And there's 10 of us in there that morning. And we each have set a certain number of grade 1s. Now, I'm fortunate, my degree's in English and I taught a lot of English, so it's a fairly easy transition for me. But it's really rewarding. I'm just curious if there's adults going into schools to help with the reading programs.
I'll start, and if you want to add on. So that's great to hear. And at one of our schools, Highview, they have recently had an EA that has retired. But again, she has that passion and wants to continue the work. So she's volunteering and coming back. So she's shadowed Lori and done some of the training. And so now she's working with groups. So I think right now we're just implementing things and just being really proactive. But that would be a phenomenal idea to have parents come in and provide that extra support.
I thought in addition to that, I'm not so sure about the volunteers, but I know that at the school I'm at, we're starting to talk about the educational assistants as well, who are working with certain students, that we could start building that bridge a little bit too, so that they could be working when they're working with their students, sort of offering that maybe in smaller snippets of times to accommodate and differentiate, but just to spread the knowledge and the experience for everyone.
Just one other follow-up. I'm just curious what schools you're representing.
We travel around, we do 6 weeks interventions at different schools. So we're on our second round. Right now I'm at Central in Renfrew. And
I'm at McNabb.
I'm at Champlain, but I was at Herman Street and Pineview before. And I'm at Cobden this round, and I was at Eganville before.
I was at Valor to start and currently I'm at Highview. I was at Mackenzie in the fall and now I'm with Janet Champlain.
Other questions, comments? Trustee Gannett.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this group present before. Awesome. I think that generally speaking, I think trustees will agree. We have a lot of great programs in this board, but probably the program that really hits me is this one, because we're probably getting the biggest bang for our buck. Honestly, the statistics speak for themselves. 53% need some significant help in reading. Without the foundation, where do you go? This team builds our foundation and also makes the teachers feel a lot more comfortable and giving them very proactive ideas in structured literacy, as opposed to some of the things they've been taught. Like you say, we're not knocking it, but balanced literacy. I mean, I think structured literacy is the new step forward, the new era. So thank you very, very much on behalf of myself, and I'm sure my fellow trustees. I mean, I could see our director just nodding with a big smile on his face, because just a joy to watch a presentation like this. And thank you, Shelley, for bringing the team here.
Thank you.
Trustee Boland?
Thank you. Just shocking just to look at the number of students in grade 1 and grade 2, according to the screener, that are below or well below just reading. And like for me growing up, I mean, reading was certainly a joy, to be able to read. So, a program like this is awesome. So the other question is, so what do you do exactly? I guess not day to day, but for the six week program, what's involved in that?
So it's a great question. So initially, we'll go in and do a quick diagnostic to see specifically where the student lacks skills. And then from there, we'll group students who have similar skills. And then we use the UFly manual, the UFly program that we pivoted from our team developed intervention to this UFly manual that's being shared all over the board right now. So we actually use the lessons in there so that everybody's doing the same thing. It can be easily imitated. The classroom teacher can do them. We do them. The kids are learning the same skills, and they're differentiated by lesson because you're learning different sounds or different vowel combinations, but you're learning to blend and you're learning to segment and you're learning about root words and
Repetitive.
it's repetitive, and you're writing with your reading. So if you learn how to read the word said, you're writing the word said as well. So you're combining the decoding and the encoding together. And at the end of our 6-week intervention, we'll do another quick screener just to compare, did we make a difference? And we've only done our first round, and after our first round, we can say that, yes, we've made a difference. Anybody want to
Well, I was just thinking another little snapshot would be that each, say, letter or each lesson is given 2 parts. So on day 1, and each of these parts is half an hour. So on day 1, there's 5 different steps, and it's review of those letters or sounds that you've learned previously. And at the end, there's a 15-minute introduction of the new one. And then to day 2, then we're consolidating that learning. So you will revisit the new one that you have just learned and then incorporate it into your writing and then even decodable passages too. So there's 2 components of a review and a new, and then new, but then we're scaffolding all of that review plus the new one on top of that into the reading and the writing piece. So
Just to add, sorry, Tanya, there's a lot of manipulation with the sounds in the program. So students are able to really see repetition and patterns and manipulate the words, nonsense words and real words included. It's fantastic. And we did see a lot, sorry, here I go again. When we did our second round of screeners, it wasn't necessarily that number of sounds that really stood out to us that students had gained. It was the skills, because you could see that they were manipulating, they were working with the sounds that they had, blending, encoding, decoding. It was incredible to see.
Because you need to do that before you can be fluent. So growth and skills is helpful. And I was just going to add that over the course of every day, we all will see 8 different groups of students, anywhere from 2 to 4 students at a time for 20 or 30 minutes. 30 minutes is our 8 groups a day. And in this capacity, we are able to pull students from different rooms that have like skills, so it can be very precise. And we can also see students that aren't maybe seen by a CERT teacher or something, someone that doesn't, they're not really on the radar yet. And we'll maybe hopefully present that.
Just a follow-up, so do you interact like with all students or just those like with, say, well below or below?
Just those that are below. We have, so for example, right now, I think I have 30 students on my caseload, so they'll be on my caseload for 6 weeks. And then after that, I'll be heading to a different school, and do the same process.
And we work with the students that are well below, unless they're being seen by the search already. Because we want to be able to support all students and not really double dip, so to speak, with the search students, because they are getting support already.
So we have maintained a lot of communication, both with the classroom teachers and the CERT teachers. It's really been a really great team approach, because even those students that we aren't seeing, we're having those conversations with classroom teachers and the CERT, and we're all on the same page.
Jenny? And just to follow up with that comment, because I think that's a really important thing to think about, because like we started off saying that these positions came about as a result of, ministry funding, which we were provided, and it has to be used by a certain amount of time. And so that tends to happen. And then, so we're always thinking about how are we using that funding in a way that creates sustainable change and impact? Because what we want is, should we not receive funding again, we sort of expect we will, at least for the next little bit, based on the, the emphasis around the right to read, but should we not, and we not be able to have the same sort of support, how do we know that it's going to transfer into our existing teams that are in our schools? And so that's been a part of, a lot of the conversations that we've been having is, what do we put in place now, and who do we have to involve in the learning so that it continues, even if we're not able to continue with this model of support that we've been so fortunate to be able to put into place this year.
And even just now, they said they're on a rotation basis. So whenever they leave their little group of kiddos and they're seeing growth and gains, it's hard to walk away because you're seeing the success, that what they're doing is working, and you want to make sure that it's going to continue then, that it's not going to stop. So that's why it was important for us to do the capacity building across the district, bring all those grade 1s and 2 teachers together, give them the tools that they need so that they have the confidence to go back in the classroom and continue that support. And as well as they had mentioned, the CERT teachers as well, that they have our big plan, and hopefully we can do this, is to have the CERTs trained as well using the Acadians so that they can do it in their schools. And, they said it took about over a month to do all of those students. So to have an extra capacity of educators to do that screening will really help. So it's exciting work. I think we've dug into the right places. We've got the right people in place doing this work, and we're learning as we go, but I can see the successes already. So I'm excited to see where the follow-up screener and that at the end of the school year looks like, so that we can compare that data and really make sure that these interventions are working for our kiddos.
That will help to give us a bit of a baseline if we wanted to be able to really use that screening data as an indicator for us going forward. Because right now, like we said, we look at that data and we think, oh goodness, but we don't know what it would have looked like last year. And we don't know what it would have looked like the year before, because we haven't used it. And so it will take some time going through the process of gathering and providing intervention and seeing the impact before we're able to say, you know, we want to be able to set this goal, which other districts have done, you know, looking at their Acadians data and saying, we would like to be able to work towards this, but we're working towards being in a place where we can do that.
Fair enough. Trustee Morris?
Thank you very much. We see a lot of presentations over the years. I've been a trustee for 23 years, 2 different times. And this presentation, the second time I've seen it, and it's one of the very best. It really is. I think Natasha made a comment that really caught me, that you know, you want to make a difference and you feel like you are making a difference, you are making a difference. You know, every single one of you had that passion, you know, for teaching kids how to read. And that is just such a foundational thing. It really is. And most of our teachers, virtually all, you know, they want to make a difference. And you're giving them the tools where they can make even a better difference. I remember Shelley from a different time. But no, she's just young. Well, I remember Shelley when she was a special education teacher, and our youngest child, son, he was at Pineview and with Shelley, and Shelley worked with him, you know, for a couple of years, and she really made a difference with him. There were a number of them, but Shelley was the first one. She really caught his attention, and he remembers her vividly, even though he was very young at the time. And every once in a while, I'd say, "I saw this again." Just remember that there are times when you're going to feel down, and, you know, when things, it didn't quite go the way I wanted it, but you are making a tremendous difference. A second thing that I want to say is, I'm really pleased to see that the emphasis is on those early grades, because it is so foundational. If you don't get them at the youngest age, then you're clipping the wings, or society's clipping the wings, or whatever, and they can't really reach their potential. So that's very good. It's kind of like our son with autism. You know, he got diagnosed extremely young compared to most. And then with the work of people like Shelley, he's made it. You are doing the same thing with so many. Every single one of you is like you came out the same cookie cutter. You're all the same with your passion and with your ability. You understand what it is that you're trying to do, and you're out there doing it. And so good on you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that's great. I'll just ditto what, I don't think there's any doubt. We know how important it is for kids to know how to read. And you're right, some kids come in because they've had structure at home, or people have read them a lot at home, and they're comfortable about reading, but we know there's a lot of kids that don't have that now. So it's wonderful that you are there. I did have one question though, and it was around kind of connecting the reading to spelling, because spelling seems to be a bit of an issue with students as well. So is there I'm assuming there's some connection here. Can you just speak to that for a moment for me?
Yeah,
Natasha will.
So, yeah, and within the program that we're doing, just like Krista was saying, when we're actually teaching them the different letters and the combinations, we give them strategies to help them sound out. So for example, if we said tap, then they do the pound and sound. So they say the word tap, and then they'd say app, and then they A.
They would write it.
P, they write it down.
Write
So
it down.
it's just that transferring. So there is definitely a correlation between the fact that if students are learning those letter patterns and that connection to the oral sounds, to those combinations, that they're carrying it over into. I noticed, especially, I would have to say, that was one of the things that really excited me, was I noticed already an improvement in children's ability to spell and segment those sounds to write words.
So it sounds to me as if there's a little bit different approach now, and it seemed that I was hearing that spelling didn't matter anymore, right? And so I'm hoping that that's a bit of a shift, because I think it does matter.
Yeah, I think they noticed it does. It does. And there's like that connection between the actual writing it and actually hearing it and seeing it, that helps to sort of like helps children to remember it, right?
Burns it in their mind.
Yeah. We would definitely be stepping away from memorized lists of words. So if I were encouraging someone, I would say, like, just incorporate the sounds that you're using into those words. So tap, app, it could very well be kind of similar to what we would think of as word families, maybe a little bit like that, just to,
Yeah. And then also in addition to that, the heart words that Natasha was showing, the ones that you cannot sound out, or the parts that you cannot sound out. In the lesson, there are spaces or times when you would say a sentence, which would include some of those heart words, like said.
Yeah, he
said, I see a dog, or whatever. So there's some words that would not be able to be sounded out, but you would have taught those and reviewed those, and there's an expectation to be able to spell those as well.
You see them and hear them often enough
Yes.
that you do learn to do that.
So-
So no more memorizing of spelling, eh? Gosh.
well, they would have to, those hard words.
Some of those they would,
remember parts of it, right? Yeah,
Heart.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, but
I was gonna say on day 2, at the end of day 2 on our 8th step, it's applying all those skills that they've learned. So they'll either dictate a little sentence and they're writing it, and it's based on everything you've learned previously. So you're constantly reviewing those skills, which helps consolidate the thinking for the kids. So
for sure. That's amazing. Yes,
Yeah,
question.
I do have a question. I'm not sure if this is the norm, but at the beginning, you mentioned dyslexia and some of the other learning disabilities or whatnot. I'm wondering if in the report there was any recommendations on diagnosing those more challenging learning issues that kids have, like dyslexia. And in terms of an equity lens as well, I know it can be quite expensive for parents to try and get their kids diagnosed.
So that was in there. One of the recommendations was that the board would have somebody to do the testing, and that in the past, it was in grade 3 or 4 that we would look at testing, but now they're suggesting that's too late, that it's more in grade 1 that you really want to catch those students and test them just to make sure that you can provide appropriate intervention moving forward so the students see success.
And just also as a follow-up or a secondary question, I guess, given the pandemic of the last few years and that you're testing in grades SK 1 and 2, is there an eye to maybe some of the kids that are standing out that are in the later grades that may have, fallen behind significantly given learning at home and efforts there?
PU Fly is coming in as well because the certs are using it.
With some of the older students. So I know at Herman Street, the CERT is seeing groups in grades 4, 5, and 6 to help sort of close those gaps that has been missed because we haven't actually taught those specific skills. So.
Right. Thank you. And thank you for the work you do, just to echo a great presentation. I really appreciate it.
Any other quick questions?
Just one quick thing. I know that SO Jenny Smith brought up a comment about keeping your fingers crossed about funding, future funding. I know this team is our building capacity team on this topic. Has there been any consideration, or has there already been some time allotment for PD with this? Because I see this as crucial. especially if in a year or two, let's say the funding did get pulled.
Yeah, that's
But
been,
just to build that capacity that much quicker.
that's been a focus that they've had, and they've pulled groups of teachers together in different areas.
Yeah, we started with our grade 1s and 2s because you saw those were where our significant numbers were. So currently, we have 4 sessions planned, and today was our second session with our grade 1s and 2 teachers and our CERTs. So we have 2 more to come. It's just, we're spreading it out so we can have smaller groups to help alleviate some of that supply pressure, and have smaller groups so that there can be conversations. But the literacy coaches and a couple of the lists will go when they can to help and partner with the literacy coaches and provide that instruction to the district.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. We really enjoyed your presentation, and we really appreciate what you're doing to make sure those students get what they need in the early years, right? Because if you can't read and write and spell, it's very difficult as you get older. So thank you so much for all you do, and keep that passion strong. I'm sure you will. Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
It's a test for Leo.
Right one to the right person.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks again. Really appreciate it. That's great. Look forward to seeing the results from the next testing, right? To see how it's improved. I'm sure it will. Excellent presentation. Thank you for that. Okay, on to committee reports to the board. I believe we have a couple of reports, and the first one is the committee of the whole report, both open and closed. So Trustee Boland.
Thank you very much. We'll start with closed. So the committee of the whole of Renfrew County District School Board met on January 24th, 2023 today, and discussed the following items in closed session. There was a personal matter and QP ratification for QP 1247 and QP 1321. There was a recommendation that was made this morning and was passed, and the recommendation is that the Renfrew County District School Board of Trustees adopts the closed session reports presented on January 24th, 2023 regarding QP ratification for 1247 and for 1321. I move that the board adopts this report.
Thank you. I need a seconder for the adoption of this report. Trustee Morris, thank you very much. All those in favor of adopting this report? And that's carried. Thank you very much. And open session.
So the open session, the committee of the whole of Renfrew County District School Board met on January 24th, 2023, that was today, and discussed the following items in open session. So number 1 was the year-to-date financial status for 2022, 2023. And the second item was international excursions, broken down into 3 parts. Number 1, preliminary report on international school excursions. Number 2, school excursion requests for Fellows High School. And number 3, the Académie Clermont-Ferrand, the ACF and RCDSB partnership. There was a recommendation that was passed this morning or this afternoon that says that the Renfrew County District School Board approved the excursion request from Fellows High School in principle to travel to Berlin, Prague, Krakow, and Budapest from March 7th to 16th, 2024. I move the board adopt this report.
And do I have a seconder to adopt this report? Trustee Dobson, thank you. All those in favor of adopting this report? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Our next committee report is the Special Education Advisory Committee meeting, open session report, and I believe Trustee Gannett will provide that for us.
Yeah, there's 3 things I want to comment on regarding that report. We were given a special education report on the statistics and the results. Presentation was given by Lisa Rigby. And one of the things that really stood out, we had time to ask a bunch of questions, but it's the first time they've given the actual statistics. That was really the report. One of the things that stood out was the number of students that had been IEP, individual educational placements, versus not. And I just found that back in the day when I was involved in special education, there was a lot more IEPs. And it's not to say that they're not important, but they do take a lot of time, effort, and keep rejigging. And I do think that for me, the way I saw it, the time is more valuably spent sometimes than just not just writing up IEPs, but sometimes not writing necessarily an IEP, but just having a document that it can be molded and moved around. I just thought that that was a very, very good thing to be able to do moving forward. Second thing I wanted to comment on was a board psychologist, Melanie Lavallee, which will help with our psychoeducational testing. And hopefully, I mean, I know when I was around, we always seemed to have a backlog. I believe, in that area. And thirdly, our chair, Amy McKenzie, mentioned she's from the Pembroke Military Family Resource Center. She said that funding for assessments for military families is going up from $2,000 to $5,000, which for those families, that's a really, really big shot in the arm. Unfortunately, there's many people that in our board that won't qualify for that, but that particular group will be well served by that big change. Those are the three things that I really wanted to bring up. Is there any questions or?
Okay, so you move the receipt of this report, Trustee Gannett. Thank you. Any seconder for the to receive this report? Trustee Morris, thank you very much. All those in favor of receiving this report? And that's carried. Thank you very much for that information. Appreciate that. And now we'll move forward on updates, and we'll turn it over to Director Buffoni, who's in downtown Toronto, but joining us virtually. So thank you. Go ahead, Pino.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. As we begin the new calendar year, I'd like to highlight, as always, a number of activities and events, initiatives, and projects taking place across the system as they relate to the achievement, equity, and well-being of our students, staff, and school communities. First and foremost, we continue as a district to follow the advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health with respect to the guidelines for safety measures in schools, including optional masking for students, staff, and visitors, as well as a series of other elements that reinforce and remind students and staff of appropriate hand hygiene, respiratory etiquette in schools and workplaces, as well as the continuation of funding for enhanced cleaning standards and ventilation and filtration improvements at all sites. We'll have an eye on that for the balance of this school year, just to make sure we're following all of the safety protocols that need be. Wanted to provide an update on an initiative from the Parent Involvement Committee. Our executive officer, Meredith Kaplan-Jameson, and I are working with both Principal Deb Taylor and our chair, Dania Pastizek, who are looking to survey parents and guardians over the coming months with respect to the insights on topics and themes they'd like to be in communication with the district about. Details are to follow up again through Dania, through Deb, and through Meredith, as well as of course, all of our stakeholders in the system who will be informed that this survey will come out. And so hopefully that will be shared broadly so that we can gather some of that good input, important input from our parents, guardians, and really turn those into actionable items for us to pick up from there. So again, something over the next few months for us. Also wanted to share with the Board of Trustees that the Ontario Winter Games will be taking place the first 2 weekends in February. On those weekends, the county will host the Ontario Winter Games. A number of our students and staff will take part as volunteers and spectators alike, with events taking place at all 7 secondary sites as noted. So we've got something happening on either of the weekends or both at all of our schools, and all members of the district are encouraged to take part, again as a spectator or as a volunteer in this extraordinary opportunity. And we've added the website so that those who are interested in volunteering can, of course, click into that. So very excited about this work. this initiative, all of it taking place outside of the instructional time for our students, except for one of the days, one of the Fridays. The other one is a PA day, but one of the days is happening during the instructional period, where we're encouraging students who would have been in their physical education classes to go and observe these amazing athletic events that are taking place. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Buffoni. Any questions or comments for Pino on his report? I know that Trustee Dobson mentioned that he's volunteering, I think, at Opeongo for fencing, so maybe you could give us lessons after that. I don't know if anybody else has had a chance to volunteer or not, but I certainly would encourage anyone to at least go and watch what's happening at our local schools. And it's nice that we're so involved in it. I appreciate that. So my chair's update, there's just a few things that I wanted just to bring to your attention. And I don't think there's any question that as a Board of Trustees, we were very pleased earlier this January to approve many important recommendations that will impact the direction of our secondary school programming for the next period of time, potentially the next decade at least. And we are particularly pleased to approve the implementation of extended French and French immersion in all of our senior grades. And that truly ensures that a student who joins us in junior kindergarten or senior kindergarten can take French immersion right through to grade 12. And I think that's a tremendous bonus that will be a great benefit to our students. As well, we approved a variety of programming that will support our students in whichever pathway they choose, making sure that we keep our academic integrity and curricular rigor as the foundation of all of those pathways. Students will also be pleased to know that a device, a Chromebook, will be provided to each student in grades 7 to 12 to be used during their entire secondary school career. And I did have a bit of a chance to speak to our student senate about that last week, and they felt that this was going to be a tremendous advantage, but also recognizing there are some parts of our district that are not very well served by our internet access. So that's a bit of an issue. Excuse me. For those of you who may want to know more about some of these details, you can review those recommendations by looking at the minutes of the January 13th board meeting or watching the YouTube video. But I do want to thank all of our staff and students and parents and guardians for their input over the past few months, and particularly to our senior team who put a lot of work and thought and time into making sure that we did listen to all of our stakeholders and took into account all the things that they were saying to us, but also recognizing that we do needed to make some changes in our future direction. So thank you for all of that. So later this week, the Ontario Public School Board Association is hosting their annual public education symposium in Toronto. And this is the first in-person event since 2020, and it's been sold out, which is quite remarkable. I don't think I've ever I've never experienced it being sold out before. And many of our sessions will be particularly important to our newer trustees. I know that Trustee Doherty will be traveling, as well as Trustee Gannett, I believe, Trustee Bolin, and myself. Unfortunately, others can't fit it into their schedule this time, but maybe next time they will be able to. I did outline a couple of the keynote speakers, which I thought I know will be very interesting. Chief Cadmus Delorme, who's going to obviously be talking about relationships with the Indigenous people in Canada. Rhoda Muse, leading the change in education. Nicholas Christakis, who moving forward from the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're still kind of on the edge of that, right? So we can't lose the sight of that. And Minister Lecce will be with us on Thursday night, and he has agreed to answer 5 questions, so we will see how that goes. The complete agenda is outlined on the OPSBA Public Education Symposium website if you're interested, and we're really looking forward to this event. 2 other quick reminders. January the 24th today is actually International Day of Education, and the purpose is to raise awareness of the importance of education and encourage collaboration with international solidarity. The date was established by the UN General Assembly in 2018, so it's a fairly new date. And in 2020, over 617 million youth worldwide lacked basic math and literacy skills. Education offers children a way out of poverty and improves their chances of having a promising future. Very important. So as a Board of Trustees and all staff in the district, we recognize how important public education is to ensuring the success of our youth in our district. And then finally, January the 25th, which I'm sure you're probably well aware of, is Bell Let's Talk Day, which promotes mental health awareness, acceptance, and actions built on 4 pillars: fighting stigma, improving access to care, supporting world-class research, and leading by example in workplace mental health. Very important day and very important topic for all of our students and staff. So with that, we'll move on to the student trustees report, and I know neither Ava or Taylor are able to be with us today. I know that they're busily studying for exams, and we'll be spending some time on important things in their lives. And they do have a written report for you so that you can read through that. They did have a student senate meeting on Tuesday, which both Trustee Dobson and I attended. Always interesting to hear what these students are saying. They were doing lots of updates from the schools, talking about equity as well, and just plans for the future. A lot of them were concerned about the fact that a lot of students have not written exams for a couple of years. And so there's a bit of anxiety and angst among students on how to study, what to study. So I know that they were quite, lots of good discussion about how staff have worked with students to help alleviate some of that anxiety over the past couple of weeks. So it was all good. It's always interesting to hear what they have to say. And then as far as an OPSBA report, I don't think we have anything else, Kim, that we needed to add about OPSBA at this point, right? Because we haven't had a meeting since the last meeting, so.
Nothing I can think of, no.
We'll have more to say at the next one, no doubt, to give you an update on that. And we do have a little bit of correspondence. It was in your package, and it's just a quick note from the mayor and deputy mayor of Whitewater region. And I thought was really interesting. They recognize the importance of Connect Well and the Ottawa Valley Health Team, and they're dedicated to working in partnership with our organization to build and strengthen our commitment. To facilitate that promise, we invite you to provide yearly updates to the council. So we will reach out to council and get a bit more information from them. And certainly if they would like to hear more about the good things that we're doing at the RCDSB, we'd be happy to share that. So that's the information on that. Is there any other business for the good of this meeting? Trustee Morris.
Just one thing I know, when in the director's report, the very first item, highlighted the things like the advice of the chief medical officer of health in the guideline for this school year, safety measures. We also had a lot of interaction with and advice from our local medical officer of health acting, Dr. Robert Cushman, who also had a long and very successful career in the same position down in Ottawa. He has retired, and we certainly wish him well. Do you think maybe we should ask our director to send a letter under both your signatures, thanking him for all the advice he's given and showing I'm really interested in our students?
That's an excellent idea, Trustee Morris. Thank you for bringing that forward. Pino, you're okay with putting something together? I think that would be very appropriate.
That's a wonderful idea. Thank you, Trustee Morris. We'll take care of that this week and ensure that it's over to you, Chair, for a signature and get that through to Dr. Cushman before month's end.
Thank you so much.
Yes, he was a tremendous help to us during those COVID times, and so yes, he's retiring again. So we do wish him well. That's for sure. Any other business or items for the good of the meeting? And if not, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Trustee Morris and Trustee Doherty seconds, and all in favor of adjourning this meeting. Thank you very much. That's carried. Have safe travels, everybody, and we'll see some of you later this week.